Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about a very valuable exercise variation. And it's one I used quite a few months back for a client of mine. I started using myself. This is some footage of the first session of me using it. I'll probably be using it a lot more coming up, and this video probably won't even be up for a month. But this is something I had one of my clients do who did later give me a shout out on my private Facebook and everything. So a lot of coaches and some of you people who watch who are on there saw it, but the general public didn't. But a young man who's pretty beat up in the Navy. He's currently active duty, and he's got some major shoulder issues. Like he has apparently an impingement in both shoulders, couldn't do any sort of bench press. And we started doing the floor press with the football bar because he had one at both of the gyms he was using on base. So he had access to the equipment, and we started doing it, and he's been able to press again, and get up to where he's pressing past 225 again now. So, building a strength base while doing this exercise. And as you guys know, for me, I didn't go that well with wider grip pressing. I tried to mess with it a good chunk of the year. Uh, Started causing quite a bit of inflammation in my shoulder and crackling and stuff in my left shoulder, and it hasn't gone that well for me. But we do need to have a way to work some of those movement patterns, even though I personally went back to close grip pressing. But people notice again, I'm doing floor press as a primary hypertrophy exercise. So I decided to break out my football bar and mess with the different grips, and I found that the really wide grip on the football bar felt great in my shoulder. All right, I was able to load everything up, do plenty of reps. This is only 225 in this one. Do quite a few reps with it. I was just set to 10. I think I hit 12 on the last one, just testing it out. No pain, no discomfort. Felt great work in my pecs. Great work in my pecs. While still using a wider grip. Okay, so there's a couple things going on here. Number one, the floor press itself slightly limits the range of motion. Now, in my case, I can touch my chest on a floor press if I arch a little bit, and when I'm flat back, the bar stops about 1 to 2 inches short of my chest usually when I use a straight bar. Now, it's probably less with the football bar, but the point is we lose that last little bit of stretch at the bottom. For people who aren't as thick, who haven't put on much meat yet, a lot of times we find that they get shoulder or chest pain from the bench press. All right, I've got a very underweight client who's like that now. I also have one who's a recovering anorexic who we're building back up. Who, again, they're both quite thin. They're very thin. When I say thin, I'm talking grown men who are less than 150 pounds. They don't have thickness. Sometimes a bench press puts a little more range of motion than we might want, which kind of begs the question, and people will say stuff like, oh, dumbbells are great for chest, but it's like the reason dumbbells work better for the chest is a deeper stretch. For a lot of guys, the bench press itself is too deep of a range of motion at the bottom with the bar touching the chest, who haven't got thicker yet. Well, floor press is good for that because we have that stop at the bottom and we have a shoulder safety there. It prevents the shoulder from going into a range of motion that could potentially compromise it, particularly for thinner individuals and some people with a history of shoulder pain. All right, it allows us to get a good range of motion, but because of the terminal range of motion there and having to engage the pecs really hard to do the lift and usually maintain a great degree of pec tightness, a lot of EMG studies show that the floor press, even with the same weight, even for people who it is a partial of several inches, with the same weight, we get better recruitment in like the middle and the upper pec than a flat bench in those cases. Now, EMGs are not the be-all, end-all. But they're not the be-all, end-all. They're subject to margins of error. They're subject to different errors. Because again, the electrode could be slightly different. Right? The electrode placement could even matter from lift to lift. It's moved 1/10 of an inch and it interferes with your reading. So again, I want to state they're not the be-all, end-all, but they're useful tools. But at the very least, we know that if the floor press at an EMG produces greater readings on the activity, we know it's not an inferior exercise. So we can at least infer that much. We can infer that much, that if it shows a greater response, we know we're not losing any activation at the very least. We can't argue that it's better always based upon that. But we know it's at least comparable. So we get a fantastic pec and tricep exercise that's easier on the shoulder joints. It works. It can be used as a primary builder. Also, it teaches you to build the muscles to get good at the bottom of a bench. Why? Because you can be super strict. All right, where I have it where your feet out, you can't use any leg drive. You can't even use any arch. It becomes very, very difficult to use anything other than your pecs to get the weight started. Makes it a very strict movement. So it's a phenomenal chest and tricep builder. Bench press builder, very strict, very easy on the shoulders. So the floor press is already a winner here. But what happens when we go to the football bar? Well, we have to pronate the hands. Now, in my case, I have straight ones that are not angled, but even the angled ones do this. As we pronate the hands, we remove some of our concerns for shoulder risk on the bench press, particularly with the wider grip for some people. It's extremely easy on the shoulder joints. In fact, for people with a history of shoulder impingement, you start finding the football bar in general, even for their overhead pressing, allows them to overhead press again. Because we change the angles, we change the amount of rotation happening with the shoulder. And no, I've definitely seen guys who are like that, who couldn't overhead press at all. You give them a football bar, they can work through the range of motion without irritating a previous shoulder injury. Again, it's just easier on the rotator cuff and the shoulder joint. So you have these two tools that we can use concurrently. And this creates a fantastic exercise. Okay, and because of the football bar, we find that it hits the triceps harder. Like I notice when I use a football bar really heavy, I tend to get the medial head of my tricep hit a little bit harder. Well, that medial head, for a lot of guys, is their weak link in their bench press. Right? It can be the weak link in the bench press. So we get a superior chest, superior tricep exercise out of this. Well, when we're looking for hypertrophy movements, what are we looking for? We're looking for movements that allow us to do the most training volume with the highest amount of stimulus, with the lowest amount of fatigue, and the lowest wear and tear on our joints. Things like reduced axial loading, less shear on different joints. Well, in this case, it's very easy on the shoulder joints. Also, because it's a floor press, we're forced to use slightly less weight. It means it's slightly easier on the wrists and everything else for the same amount of stimulation. The only reason we run into problems with training volume is the recovery side, right? That's usually our issue. We know that more training volume generally equals more growth. You can argue that till you're blue in the face. The downside is the recovery end of it. And recovery is not just at the muscular level. Recovery could be joints. Recovery can be connective tissue. It can be compression on the spine. All these different factors. So what we're oftentimes looking at is how much stimulation can we get through a series of muscle, even per unit of weight, because weight itself is an issue. We generally want to focus on progressive overload on any given exercise, but we should be picking exercises that allow us to use slightly less weight, thus less fatigue from a recovery end. They give the same amount of stimulation with the lighter weight. The muscular level, that's where you get your hypertrophy. That's why I tell people good mornings are generally better than Romanian deadlifts. Again, we're assuming the same muscles are worked, not, oh, we do an isolation movement because it's lighter. No, because you're not hitting all the same muscles. But in this case, we have a phenomenal stimulus to fatigue ratio on a big compound movement. It's very easy on the shoulders. All right, this can be a winning ticket for anyone with a history of shoulder inflammation, or for people who are trying to do very, very high volumes of training who want to avoid any sort of shoulder issues, kind of like why we use the buffalo bar to squat. All right, guys, well, that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.